Let's write a function that randomly rolls a six-sided dice and returns a value for that roll between 1 and 6. We know that it will return one of these whole numbers, which are integers. So let's start by writing our function definition with a return type of int and name our function roll dice. And this return type means that we expect a return statement in our function that returns an int as output. Now let's start writing the code to generate this random int between 1 and 6. We can use math.random to generate a decimal number that falls between 0 and 1, not including 1 exactly. But how do we get this value to be an integer between 1 and 6? Well, we know how to create a number between 0 and 9.999 from before by multiplying this random number by 10. So let's use a similar strategy to change this range to be between 1 and 6. Let's first focus on our total range. When we wanted to create a range that had 10 total numbers in it, 0 through 9, remember to count 0 as an option too, we multiplied our random number by 10. So 10 numbers multiplied by 10. This time we'll want a range that has 6 numbers in it, 1 through 6. So we'll want to multiply by 6 to get this correct range. So let's multiply our random number by 6. Then the random number here will be between 0 and nearly 6. But that's not quite what we wanted, because now we've just expanded our range from 0 to almost 1 to 0 to almost 6. And we want the minimum value of our range to be 1, not 0. And we want our highest value to be nearly 7, not nearly 6, so that later, when we cast this value to an int, a maximum value close to 7, something like 6.999, will be cast to a max integer value of 6. So we'll need to shift this whole range up by 1. We can do that by adding 1 to our random number. And our adding 1 shifts this range into the correct place, 1 through almost 7. The next thing we need to do is our casting step to get the random integer we want without any decimal place value. And we can cast this number by putting the variable type we want, which is an int, in parentheses right before the value we want to change, random number. And let's assign this value to a variable random int. And again, even if the double random number value is close to 7, something like 6.998, when this is cast to an int, it will turn into 6 because the decimal portion is ignored entirely. So now we have our correct range, 1 through 6, all integers. And to return this value, there's one more step, our return statement. And for that, we actually say return and then the value we want to return, in this case our variable random int. Great, now we have a return type and a return statement, and we can call this function and get a random int as output. So we wrote a function definition for roll dice. Now let's call it twice and store the output. The output should be a randomly generated integer that's between 1 and 6, so let's store these as int variables roll1 and roll2. Let's also include printing code that will print out the value of roll1 and roll2. And the print output might look something like this. Your first roll will be a 2, and the second roll is a 5. So even though these two rolls were assigned to the same function call, each time we call this function, a new random integer between 1 and 6 will be generated. And that's why these have different roll values. And if we ran this code again, new random values will be generated. So good job! We've finished writing a program that can simulate rolling dice.